Hello and welcome to the comment response, and these videos have been unsurprisingly quite popular and quite interested. Now, I have to admit, there were some comments which were interesting, and I did have some IT issues when it became live, and it didn't, for some reason the slides didn't seem to start working for a while, and I wasn't quite sure why. Got on working, but it did delay the start of the live. It's always interesting when that happens. But let's get into the comment response. Yes, on the live there was at the end some pictures of what Hood and Warspite might look like with four triple 15-inch, with four triple 15-inch 50s as their weapons, which was kindly provided by one of the viewers. It's an interesting scenario to look at. It's certainly an interesting one to consider. Let's see. Yes, I put them down there. Yeah, there you go. I'll leave them there for this. And that's really what a lot of this turned into, a discussion of the triple 50s, of the 15-inch 50s, and many people going, wow, what could they have done? Also, yes, as I said to Knight 6831 when he asked, are we sure Doc is not returning into a supervillain? Well, you have noticed that most supervillains these days seem to have very advanced degrees in university, so by definition I'm halfway there with my academic qualifications. Hood went through the Panama Canal in 1924 as part of Special Service Squadron. GeoGuy001, thank you for pointing that out, and as I come to respond, I've actually done a video on the Special Service Squadron and its Empire Cruise and what it got up to, and I couldn't remember it when we were live. I've been spending too much time in the Soviet Union Navy trying to sort out those videos. And not a wolf, really fluffy research assistant said that half the time that's what happens when I visit Van. The golden goes to the front and the Japanese and to divide up the legs and the back. Yeah, Corgi's big enough to do it without the backup on the back. Now, Nigerian, is that not basically what happens during the Empire Cruise with Hood and Repulse? Basically them going around the world going, look how powerful we are. Remember, we're not the most powerful weapons the British have. Yeah, that is to an extent what they're doing. It's just because the procurement policy side of it doesn't work out, the British are not going to necessarily drop the plan. It worked well for nearly 100 years. They like that plan. One of the interesting things with these F3, the F3s and the F2 here, is it is a 15-inch 50, and a number of people will come back going, you sure it's not the 15-inch 45? No. On the subject of the 15-inch 45 versus the 15-inch 50, the 15-inch 45, the Mark II, seems to turn up to be used as a foil versus the 14-inch. And that's interesting to me. Mainly because the whole point is it's a 14-inch 45 versus a 15-inch 45. Which is the better gun? And of course you can make the case, well, we can fit extra ones. We don't think we could get more than 9 15-inch 45s on this gun, this ship, but we think we could, thanks to the various fittings, we could actually, and the lightness and the extra sort of just the marginal weight savings you get, we can actually put in 12 14-inch 45s. And that's an interesting point to make. But would 12 14-inch 45s really stack up against 9 15-inch 50s? It's this interesting thing. The British have this 15-inch 50 design they're quite happily putting on the ships and working out for ships for in the 1920s. And yet when it comes to the mid-1930s, oh no, all we can do is a 15-inch 45. Or 16-inch, or 14-inch 45, or 16-inch 45. It's an interesting position to be in. I do notice that they are triple turrets, so that's Warspite with 12 15-inch 50s. That is otherwise known as, Armageddon. It will be interesting, again, the 15-inch 50, considering the performance of the Italians with that caliber and gun system, how the British would have done with that. It would be interesting. But anyway, we're getting into the questions. On the water armour is actually used in other forms as well. The Italian Pugliese anti-torpedo bulkheads worked in a similar manner, only using oil. Something that was copied in the Project 1047 and Dutch IVS Project 323 designs, and of course the Fitzy Soyuz. Water has some peculiar characteristic. Thank you, Marcus Fransonian. As for example, you can place a 500 kilogram bomb next to a dam on the water side and barely does any damage. Place 25 kilograms of explosive against the same dam, cover it tight. Waterproof tape will do with a piece of watertight plastic, and you blow a hole in the dam no problem. As just that simple layer of plastic between explosive and water creates an impenetrable barrier, and the explosions look for a way of least resistance and goes through concrete and metal like a knife through butter, like a shaped charge that takes out tanks. And don't forget, water combined with wood, metal, rock chips, and any kind of contamination will do, produces an extremely hard substance called pykrete, a substance that would be construction material for the construction of HMS Habakkuk. True. I think they're planning on using lots and lots of... I think the Mosquito production line, all the wood, all the used up sort of wood dust was going to be a major supply for the Habakkuk. I think that's what that's always been one of the urban myths I've heard many times, and so often now that I almost think there might be a grain of truth in it. Just imagine a ship using its wing tanks for pykrete, a few cooling systems to cool the pykrete, and if inspected, the only thing you can see is some dirty water. What a wonderful item! That can be formed in many interesting ideas. Yeah, I wouldn't like to use ice or pykrete because it tends to expand and it might actually do nasty things inside your hull, but it's an idea. John Evans, I was in that night 681. I was looking at ideas for modernising Hood the other day, and ripping out the 1500 tons of crushing tube seems to be a great start. However, in Nelson, this is weight saving. In that, it brings down the sand displacement, but it still adds to the full. With Hood, the issue is the displacement problem is really, i.e. 1500 tons of metal with 2000 tons of liquid would only make her more overweight. You can move oil and water around, but I was trying to work out the best changes you can make without missing a date with Bismarck on 24th May 1941, and I think this work would really need a full rebuild of the engineering spaces with new machinery and boilers. Potentially. But for a global first one, Dr. Clarke, would it be possible to build a ship within treaty limits but with larger batteries able to take a triple turret, same gun or a larger gun in a twin? For example, build a ship with able to fit triple 15-inch guns but fit it with twins to save weight, and refit it when war comes and the escalator clause is invoked, or possibly instead of adding the triple 15-inch gun you could put in twin 16 if the barbette is still large enough. Honestly, the difference between the size for a triple 15 a barbette, the barbette you'd fit in for it for an ample sized turret, would provide an extremely spacious twin 15-inch turret, but also would probably provide space for a triple 16-inch turret. I.e., you could probably make one, especially if you egged it slightly in design, you could design it. But then you'd have to build the turrets, and the turrets take time, and your other problem is going to be, if you design it for 15-inch ammunition, then you're going to have to rebuild the entire ammunition spaces. Conversely, I have been thinking about this, and actually, the twin to triple is certainly an idea. You could have it so you could just lift out the turrets and replace them with new turrets. Where those new turrets would be is an entirely different matter, as it's slightly more complicated to store turrets around the place, unlike armour for certain county class ships. But, again, you could theoretically fit those turrets in, I don't know, some sort of fortification in Portsmouth or other naval-based harbours, and they just come in, they rotate out and replace the local defensive fortifications with the twin turrets, and they take the triple turrets onto the ships. it's a potential there, but it would require a lot of work. A lot of comments over the number of cousins. Yes, I was basically talking away, covering the IT issues while trying to work out the IT. They are expensive at Christmas. They are lovely, but they're expensive at Christmas. Rob DB. Okay. Honestly, I'm not sure I considered that revenge. You are doing a nice sort of conversation and all these things, but you want to learn about naval history, not modern family social structures and how many cousins I have. Yeah, that's fine, but then you might prefer the long patrols rather than the lives, because that's straight in. The lives are always going to be a bit discursive because I run them like I do seminars. And the standard rule when you're having IT issues is basically everyone chats amongst themselves while you try and sort it out. But leaving that to one side... Yeah. It's kind of like that with 20th of July 1944. I mean, again, I'm hungry sometimes. I'm sorry if you... I agree, probably it's something I should think about in the future if I'm eating and I've got a presentation where I can expand it to cover me, because I don't want you to see the cement mixer going around. But it's also not my intention, and sometimes I just don't think because I'm hungry. And I'm concentrating on this and making sure this is working. Mainly because XSplit does tend to give me some panic attacks on a quite regular basis. Right then, so... Ooh. The Long Patrol has a lot more discussions. Okay, a lot more comments. And basically I have gone with the one which has had the most comments from last week, which was the Nelson videos combined. As is always the policy. Admiral Beatty, Nelson class, one of my favourite battleships. Thank you, Dr. C. I thought you'd have preferred the F3s. These were what Beatty wanted. That's good timing. Completely accidental, but that's good timing. Come on. Yeah, the divided America starting with the British Empire would not have been a sensible idea. No, it wouldn't. Let's be honest, Abraham Lincoln understood that. Many people understood that. It was only Seward who sort of believed the idea that if somehow the Union ended up at war with Britain, the Confederacy would renounce their independence, rejoin the Union to wage war against Britain. Even the British were sort of looking at it and going, "Are you... what have you been, in the kindest possible way, sniffing lately?" That's a good way to start yourself a multi-front war, and to find yourself no longer able to impose a blockade on the South. Because the British might not like the South, but actually starting a war with them would make them... The British should make friends with lots of people when they're fighting wars against people they don't... fighting a war. They don't care who they are, who you are. If you're fighting our enemy, we will make friends with you. And provide you just enough aid to fight them. Not so much you can actually do anything with it. And if you want proof of that, look at how we managed the Prussians for generations. So many problems of Europe in the early 1900s are thanks to British policy in the early 1800s. It's just wonderful. I don't know. Spencer Jones. If only the RN had been willing to use the same cheat as the USN did with the Lexingtons, probably would have gotten a lot of additional capability on a 38,000-ton design. Would have been diplomatically interesting as first London Naval Treaty as a result, though. On another note, would it have made more sense to go with 6 twin 4-inch mounts instead of 6 single 4.7s they got for the heavy air guns, or at least added more 4.7s? Okay, so the trouble is, we know what comes afterwards, and this is basic problem when we're looking at the Nelsons and everything. We know what kind of war they end up fighting afterwards. We know what World War II is like. We know heavy air armament is necessary for dealing with mass attacks. We know that speed would have been more useful than necessarily firepower. I.e., you could have accepted 15-inch rather than 16-inch guns. And we do know that actually having even built up the 35,000 standard tons and the 15-inch guns would have probably given enough speed to make lots of people's lives really, really fundamentally annoying. Let alone if they built it up to 38,000 tons using what the USN did for the Lexingtons. I don't think that would actually quite apply. It's an interesting idea to think about what a 38,000 standard displacement Nelson or Nelrod would look like in that design. I'm fairly sure at that point we'd be talking... Well, if we're not talking 29, 20, 30 knots, I would be really surprised. And probably it would be if we go through this a bit. Here, this one. I think you would have probably seen an F3 style design with O3 style armor. And when I say O3, I mean Nelson style armor. I also think the boiler rooms and the engine rooms would be spun around. A la, well, a few vessels. A la what they do actually in Nelson Rodney. And the few we were discussing, why do you do this? Because the boiler rooms are hotter than the engine room. So if you want to make things easier to keep your magazines at an even temperature, and you can see the magazine spaces and how they're divided up beneath the guns, you put the engine rooms near closer to the boilers. Yes, it does lengthen your shaft, but believe it or not, the weight of stuff you would have to put in between the two can make a difference. Plus, I think if you do it this way, you could probably design it to have free shafts. And that's another thing. You would need a free shaft design. You would need a free shaft design, a free shaft, probably F3 form with the engines the other way around to make it work. But you could do. And then you could have all the benefits of the... you would really... Let's be honest. If you had something with that level armor, designed for a speed of 30 knots, there would be a fair number of people crying, probably. Because you would then have made a very big hole in anyone's arsenal in terms of what they'd work out to do. As for the single 4.7s, they work. But I do agree. I'm rather naughty. I would say the RN has a good dual-purpose gun sitting there, which they could really do. They've got the 5.5-inch gun wandering around on various things. I think you could have turned that into a dual-purpose mount, and I think you could have turned that into a dual-purpose mount with the technology available in the 1920s. And considering especially as they don't rush to build a Nelson and Rodney, so if they've been prepared to do a little bit of development work and a little bit of studying on it, I think they could have built those, and I think you could have had a very interesting scenario because you could have had a 5.5-inch dual-purpose gun. Now, what do I think that does for a heavy AA? Ooh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how good that works out as. But we're talking about, broadly speaking, 133, 134, 5mm gun. That could well prove pretty darn capable, because let's be honest, 5-inch is 127. Half an inch is 12.7 added onto there. So hang on, no. So that's 100. It's basically a 140mm gun. 140mm gun. Excuse the early maths. It's an interesting idea. 140mm dual purpose is what I would have liked, because they've already got that sort of gun going around on hood and various other things. So you could have worked on it, and you could have ended up with a twin 100, and then you might have actually ended up with a strange thing where the British might well have ended up It's a question whether the C's don't end up with that put in earlier if they have that, because that's a definitely dual-purpose capable weapon that sounds almost battleshipy, especially when you consider the RN's destroyers are on with 4.7 inch, 5.5 inch, well, almost cruisery, if you know what I mean. Yes, cruisers are supposed to have 6-inch guns if they're like cruisers in British terms, 6-inch guns, but if you're going to turn your C-class into AA cruisers, a 5.5-inch gun sounds like you're turning them into something which is definitely not destroyery, because it's bigger than a destroyer's loud, but it's not. It's going to be a general purpose, dual purpose weapon, if you've got it working by that point. Paul Frigio, I don't know that you say that you can say G3 is a battlecruiser. The fact that they call her a battlecruiser will be my starting point. She's a chunky girl, armoured against her own shells, with a block coefficient of 0.650. I'm not sure where you get that, because, and I will say this why when I get onto the second comment response, that puts that firmly into battleship category, particularly when you consider Iowa and Hood hang out a little under 4.450. She is designed for a battlecruiser role, but I suspect similar to the Elizabeth, she would not make a design top speed. Now, my figures get closer to John Evans, because he gets a block coefficient of 0.578 for Hood, and I get, broadly speaking, 0.575 for Hood, and he gets 0.579 for G3, and I get 0.58. So I'm not sure where our maths is all different there, but I think at some point on Discord, the three of us are going to have a group chat and go through our sums together, because speaking as the historian, definitely in this conversation, I'm not sure I necessarily trust my maths and physics, but I am doing the same formula my dad taught me. So I'm literally just plugging in numbers into the formula which I have written down and I've used many, many times before. And actually I have it worked out as an Excel spreadsheet, but I do the hand calculations just to check the Excel spreadsheet, because I don't trust Excel that much. I trust it, just not the whole way. I wonder if you've ever been copyright struck. I wonder if you've ever been copyright struck for your opening music. And thanks for another nice video. Well, that's one of the reasons why I don't have an opening yet. Every piece of music I've tried as an opening, to set up an opening montage to, because, well, let's be honest, Drac has a really good one. I know Jamie on Armacaris keeps talking around, so I feel like I'm letting the side down. I'm letting down the Belgium's crew because I don't have one, and I've kept trying to work on one, and so far not working. Not working. It keeps getting so it keeps getting copyright struck. So, and this is not me singing, and I have to admit the me singing thing, I've already explained this a couple of times now on various other points, is one of the things I do is to check that the mics are all working, because I don't want to start talking, and because then I'm following my train of thought, and then notice the slide isn't working, and this little bar isn't going across, and therefore the mic isn't picking up, because that has happened before me. Let's be honest, I have started these a couple of times and they've been completely silent. So I tend to do something singing, especially when I'm worrying about it, because I've had issues that day. So I sort of do the da 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 da, or whatever else I can think of at a time, which I just think's just randomly going through my head. And that's how I start it up. Basically, it's me checking everything's working. John Adams, I feel bad for the Nelsons. People just remember them as slow. They proved anything that didn't or couldn't run away was banging trouble. Often than a mistaken change of direction in their gun design. These ships are very advanced for the 20s. Yes. And again, it's one of those things. If you kept the British design 15-inch 50, would you have necessarily done those changes like they did with the 16-inch? It's an interesting point to consider. You see, the thing is, the 15-inch 50 is so compelling to me when I'm looking back through history. And I can understand them going time, we have to have a 16-inch because they all have 16-inch. We can't be the only ones without it. But there's also me going there. But logistically,
Logistics. All the ships could have the 15-inch 50. It would require some turret work. But they could all have the 15-inch 50. They'll use the same shells, the same hoist. None of that will matter. It'll just require a little work of balancing the weight in the turrets. Please, it makes so much sense. Oh. Before anyone asks the question, yes, I do that sometimes when I'm talking with students and working things through. It's amazing what you can do to make the things stick in their brains. But seriously. It would have made so much sense. Oh, the British Admiralty goes all, I don't know, French or German. Yes, instead of us deciding to go on what logistically and efficiently is the best solution, we will go for what is technically the best solution. Generations of the Napoleonic Wars, including towards the end sometimes using more lighter cannon on ships because they could produce those more easily than the bigger cannon, and they would work for a volume of fire thing. And you sit there and go, yeah, you've got all that legacy. And then, but we want the big gun. You want the big gun. Okay. Do you fancy using about, I don't know, 800 more tons, not the full 1200 more tons, 800 more tons to get her a little bit more speed so she won't be laughed at for the entire rest of the time because of the speed? No. We're going to save the tonnage. I know we're allowed 35,000 tons each, but we're going to save the tonnage. We've not got a single, because, you know, we're being nice to them. Why? Because we want to set a good example. Why? Because we want to look good? Why? You're not saving money. You're not saving anything. Yeah. I can see why. I can. Yeah, joking aside, I can see why it sets an example. It allows them to talk down everyone else. It allows them to say, look, we're leading from the front. We're doing this by example, showing it can be done. But also, they show it can be done, and they show what the price is. And at that point, they basically can... This is the trouble. This is one of the problems, again, when you're doing this. If you build it down too much, and everyone could see the armor's great, the firepower, fine. No one else really knew there were issues to the 16-inch guns. No one else's spies were telling them that their penetration was terrible or anything like that. All they saw were 16-inch guns and thought, oh my lord. And the British weren't spreading around going, this is not performing as we thought it would. It turns out our testing was terrible. But, thanks to the various treaty descriptions and the things you pass on, people knew the rough speed characteristics of the Nelson and Rodney. So they knew it was slow. So the British had therefore showed that you can build in the treaty limits, but it's going to be slow. Ralph, I like the Nelson class. Anything that annoys Admiral King is pretty great in my book. I can't wish it being replaced, but I can take joy in watching things increase his blood pressure. Also, I get the impression that not even the Japanese were completely sold on reclassifying the Conquer class as battleships. They always seem to use them as battlecruisers or as some other sort of capital ship that was separate from the proper battleships, at least prior to 1944, when they started deploying alongside Yamato and Nagato. Yes, but... And I got into this on Sunday, so I've answered this to extent on Sunday, but again I will go into the point I make. Which is, you have a spectrum of capital ships, broadly speaking, especially by the time you get to the 1920s and 30s. And if on this end is your battleships, actually your problem on this end is your coastal defense battleships, which sacrifice speed for armor and firepower, and then there's the Nelrod class, which are sort of battleships, but they're sort of edging towards the coastal battleship spectrum, Then you go along, you have the fast battleships, which are, to an extent, sacrificing a little bit of armor and perhaps a little bit of firepower for speed, in that they won't have the biggest guns, instead of the 18-inch guns, or the 16.5-inch guns, or 16-inch guns, or And then you have the battle cruisers, one word.
Tigers, Congos, Hoods, which are designed to hunt down other battlecruisers and kill them. And then you have the battlecruisers 2 words, which are the Invincibles, Indefatigable, those sort of things. Okay, designed to hunt down cruisers and commerce raiders and take control of the ocean's trade and be the cost-efficient methodology of allowing you to cut a load of ships if you're Jackie Fisher. Now, Congos start here. And I argue, not their armour, but their subdivision and the way they're redesigned in their design work pushes them closer on this spectrum to fast battleship territory, which they then get classified by the Japanese High Command, than remaining in the battlecruiser. But it's on that spectrum somewhere. And it's where you draw the line is a highly subjective thing depending on your own personal beliefs. And your own personal views of how the data stacks up. The Japanese and me, the Japanese Navy and me, classify them that. But they still treat them as battlecruisers, because they were battlecruisers. And let's be honest, it's a grey area once you're on that sort of span between fast battleship and battlecruiser. It's a very grey area. Rob Marsh, I was just reading about King's handling of the Eastern Seaboard U-boat war. It's beautiful, except for straight Anglophobia. Took him down a couple of pegs in my book for sure. He has issues. But also, you have to remember, he is very passionate about defending the United States. The United States is his passion. It's one of those things. I spent quite a lot of my life defending Admiral King. And literally, I'm defending him because I think he works hard. He's trying his best to protect America and America's interests and America's status. And he doesn't want to admit weakness and admit they actually can't fight a two-ocean war and anything at that point, because that would admit that the USN has that the US hasn't achieved is the same as Britain. Is in the same boat as Britain, because Britain at that time can't fight, let's be honest, a free ocean war. Well, 2 oceans and a very large sea, which basically takes the resources of an ocean because of the sheer amount of concentration of firepower within it. War. Britain can't do that either. Britain's straining everything it can and it can't. And so this is one of the reasons why you end up with the division of labour you do, where the British take the lead in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. The Americans playing a very close supporting act. Very close support in it. And the Americans take the lead in the Pacific. Because neither has a large enough navy to do both. Neither does. They don't. They're the 2 largest naval powers by treaty, by reality, and yet neither has the power to do what they really need to do to fight a multi-ocean war. I'd argue because of the way they actually wrote their treaty themselves. Dan Freeman. I think I love the F3 design more every time I think about it. How will I change the F3 into taking into actual production? I agree with the rearrangement of the boiler rooms, moving them to be after the engine rooms, and subdividing the engine rooms more. I like the thickness of the armour above the magazines and control spaces. 7 inches of deck armour. Hello, Colonel Mitchell. I see your bluff and smack it in place with a giant lump of steel. Secondary armour worries me a bit as it's relatively limited. The number of 6-inch guns that can be brought to bear on any annoying destroyer cruisers coming up behind me, as the F3 is likely to only be 2 twin mounts, and backing them up, all I have is some pom-poms. This is less of an issue in early service. I should have some supporting cruisers, even if only CDE class, to keep me from getting inconvenienced. Later, I can hope to get refitted and can get a load of those sexy new 4.5-inch twin mounts before they start giving them to little destroyers and other such lesser creatures. Dan, you and I are going to have trouble if you keep calling destroyers other such lesser creatures. I would happily lose the 24.5-inch underwater torpedo tubes, but fear the Iron is going to stick to that idea plan circa 1922, and removal later won't help me with structural issues, even if they are removed in favour of a better armoured cheese magazines and other improvements later. Moment to pause in memory of the cheese so cruelly lost when Nelson was torpedoed. Currently working on my own idea for procurement after an alternative Washington Naval Treaty to allow more ships. British Empire and USA 20 capital ships of 35,000 tons each. Empire of Japan 13 capital ships of 35,000 tons each. France and Italy 7 capital ships of 35,000 tons each. I have a feeling you want to give Japan 14, but I can understand why you're saying 13, but 14 would make them happy. It's that 7 to 10 ratio they wanted. Might actually cause some peace to break out for a little bit longer. Certainly make it far more difficult for Germany and Germany and Italy to fan the issues. But Japan was feeling pretty aggrieved, but it would be a case of there are ways of making them not so much less likely. There'll probably still be a war at some point, but it would make it probably delay it a bit. There'd also be a greater scrapping option allowed, so that Britain, for example, could get rid of all the 13.5-inch armor ships as well as the 12-inch ones. This would allow up to 700,000 tons less 5Q in Elizabeth, 5 R's Hood and Renan Repulse. Carriers could be similar increase in number, albeit in similar ratios. This would allow for a 10-10-6-4-4. That's right. Frankly, I would have had maybe 40 to 50,000 tons. That's what everyone's building. That's 35,000 tons is impractical. I'm not getting into that whole thing, but as I've gone through the Equitable Treaty series, which you should be able to find on the channel, has a whole Equitable Treaty series, I did go with the 40,000 tons myself. Because basically it made more sense to me. Fight for a global First Amendment. Dr. Clarke, could a ship be built with larger barbettes than the turrets are fitted with and save weight, and be able to refit with a larger gun turret when the escalator calls for vote? For example, Nelson's being fitted with 4 twin 16-inch turrets, but with barbettes they will take a triple later date. One that would work. 1, would that work? 2, would it be realistic? And 3, is there enough way to go to upgun a ship while keeping it cheap enough to justify refit rather than building a new ship? Thank you, sir. Well, Richard Cutts has already done a bit of a response on this. If you look at many older ships, the turrets look way small for the barbette. First, I wanted the same thing. If there was a planned upgrade. Since then, I've decided it had to do with the bulk of machinery needed to rotate the turret. An example was given, which is a pretty good example. Like, while it may be possible, they would have to armour the top of a barbette and have the machinery with an extra large and strong mounting to rotate the turret, fill in the gap. I'm not sure how much weight for treaty purposes it would save. Though I'm not sure if anyone seriously considered the idea. It is nice out-of-the-box thinking. You could do it, as I discussed before, but it would... You are saving the weight of the gun, the gunnery, the sort of the machinery which gets the shell up to that gun, the crew for that gun, and the gun and sort of the breach mechanism and all those things for the gun and the system which moves that gun, but you do need a lot of space for it. And as I said, it's going to be difficult to build them unless you can have a way to store them. And as I said, the forts are an option. That's here. In regards to the Hood, if it is believed she exploded at a second time, considering the propellant of the forward magazines will fall backwards, it is reasonable to doubt Hood exploded. It is reasonable to doubt Hood exploded a second time? Yeah, I would need a lot more data to go through. But there could have been secondary explosions, but whether she exploded a second time, as in had a large initial explosion rather than the secondary ones, is something which would be interesting to consider. Rich Cuts, I think the firepower advantage of the 15-inch 50 for the whole fleet make up for the minor prestige buff of the 2 ships, not to mention logistical benefits of only having 1 shell size. You suggested that Queen Elizabeth's, and by implication ours, might not be able to take longer barrel. Yeah, I was more trying to lean towards the R's than the Queen's. Having issues. The Queen's, I think it would require balancing of the turrets, pretty much. You have to make sure they had some probably weight added. So you'd be adding weight probably to get the turrets to work, which is going to have a strain on the mechanism. So you're probably going to have to strengthen the turret mechanism and all these things. So it's going to be work. I would think this could be rectified when they were brought in for refit and boiler upgrades. Even if some of the ships like the R's didn't get a full refit, it might be possible to swap out the turrets and guns for longer barrel. The thing is, I'm not sure if you actually need to completely change the turrets, just the guns, the barrels, etc. It's going to be the balancing issue. Especially with the Queens, because they are super firing. You aren't going to have space of the problem of this, but you are going to have space into difficulty in terms of it's moving the weight of that gun, that barrel around, and the extra weight, because, let's be honest, a 42 is 120, 10 feet shorter barrel than a 50. 10 foot shorter barrel. That's some weight, and that's going to be some momentum, so it's going to have to be calibrated. I think the Queens possibly would have taken it, as would around to hoods, but it would be expensive, as would require modification turrets, and possibly even both, so I'm not sure the R-Class get it. Duke of Buckingham then responded, the BL 15-inch L45s Mark IIs, the Italians made 15-inch L50s. Now, Duke of Buckingham, we've already discussed this, so I'm not that worried, but I think, as said, you just fell into the trap, which I've already talked about, that the later one, which is considered for the King George V, is a 14-inch 45. The one which has been considered for the F3s was a 15-inch 50. So the 15-inch 45 Mark II, the Mark II, is what's considered for the King George V's in the mid-1930s. The 50 was what's considered for the F3s. The 15-inch 50 was considered for the F3s. And as I said, if you check out drawings, you'll see the plan guns for the F3 and F2 were 15-inch 50s, never made, and not even considered for King George V's. Richard Cuts, as long as the 15-inch 50 used the same shells as the 15-inch 42, it's tolerable. It would do. At least the RN would only have to carry one size of ammunition instead of two, 15-inch and 16-inch, or if the King George V still had the 14-inch free. I know the RN's destroyer guns, secondaries and airs evolved over time, 4-inch, 4.5-inch, 4.7-inch, 5.25 and 5.5-inch, but goodness gracious me, they wouldn't have made things so much easier on themselves by just picking caliber, except possibly the 4-inch and improving on it. You can preach that to the choir. Steve Cross, if I recalled, the Rodney managed to hit 25 knots during the Bismarck chase, and whilst the 16-inch 45s were not the best gun due to the comparatively light shells, they still did perfectly well against the Bismarck. The hit forward scored by the Rodney was probably the most devastating hit a ship's taken without blowing up in modern warfare, considering they knocked out A and B turrets, probably damaged the bridge with shrapnel, and possibly mucked up comms between the main fire director and the guns. It was certainly a lucky shell. 15-inch 50 might have done just as much damage, if not more. Sorry, I'm gonna get off it in a second. Richard Guts, one thing you mentioned earlier in the video was eliminating torpedo tubes and Nelson class for more armor. Would this really been much of a weight saving? These areas would have been given anti-torpedo bulkheads, which would use up some of the weight benefit. Yes, they would have had some anti-torpedo bulkheads, but they would also, and this is the thing, have spaces more subdivided up, so they would be more resistant to impact. Not those huge spaces which can be flooded, so it's less danger from that. And you would then have other options for using that space for things. So there would be advantages. Duke Michigan, fully armoured battlecruisers. Winston Churchill probably. Love the nail rods, but wish they made the rear 16-inch triple to be firing over the other two and not no torp tubes. Responsible. So an F3 style design then. It would have worked. Duke Michigan, I had a look at the F3 design, but I could not find anything on modifying it with 16-inch L45 Mark I guns. For plan weight of speed, I'm surprised they didn't go for them in the first place. Well, basically, you could take honestly, the differences between the 16-inch 45 and the 15-inch 50 are so slight, you could probably just insert as shown. It's, in fact, let's be honest, 16-inch 45, what's that going to be? 16-inch 45. Well, for my count, that's 720 millimeters. 720 inches, sorry. And if that's 720 inches long, that is
About 60 feet. 15-inch 50. Well, by my count, that's 750 inches long, which is 62.5 feet. So actually the 16-inch 45 takes up less space. It's interesting. In terms of barrel length. And then probably width. The barrels are probably not going to be that much different or dissimilar in terms of width. The things will be in different internal mechanisms. But honestly, to convert the F3 to a 16-inch 45 is not a massive technical feat. Debrook. I'm another fan of Nelson Rodney, especially the all-forward main battery. In fact, I chose that layout for my main battery of some of my Texas Navy ships in my Republic of Texas book series. As for Dr. Clarke's question, the F3 looks okay as it is. I'm not sure I understand the thought about reversing the positions of the engine in the boiler spaces. Wouldn't moving the engines forward mean longer and possibly more vulnerable propeller shafts? Thinking about what happened to Prince of Wales when she was sunk. Nice to coach Fiona responded to this first. Maybe so, but also avoids the whole shell fetching up in engine room and setting off chain explosion that destroys the entire ship that poor Hood was victim of. There are many things it does have an advantage of. If you go with this sort of design, and you continue with the design which they did with Nelson Rodney in terms of the engines, and the reason you have this sort of structure of having the boilers after the engine room, and then you have the shafts running through, is it does create a lot more survivability. Now, why does it create survivability? Well, it spreads out your targets, which are multiple. Your boilers are aft. Your magazines are forward. Your engine room's in the middle, but engine rooms, especially if they're divided up across them, are spaces which can take quite a lot of punishment, because if some piece of metal, heavy piece of metal comes in, there's often a lot of heavy bits of metal in there which are going to stop them going anywhere else. Whereas if a bit of heavy metal hits a boiler, it tends to go boom. Boilers already basically controlled bombs. So is a magazine. Keeping those separate means that you're less likely to have those having an impact on each other. As well as, of course, the heat issues and the efficiency issues of the whole gunfire operations. Paul Fricago, sometimes there is no good decision being made, and sometimes you leave BT and Chatful in charge. As Blackadder once said, if you want something done right, kill BT before you start. Interesting thing is, this whole B3, F3, F2, these good designs are actually pushed for by BT. He actually starts pushing for a good design, and then he settles for the other one. If anyone could push and could have pushed it through, it could have been him. We could have had an evolved version of the F3. Let's call it the D3. Nelson and Rodney. And yeah, it could have been a very interesting ship. Honestly, I think I would have settled for 28 knots. I would have settled for... Aiming for 28.5 knots is good, because it means if you end up being slow, you're 28 knots. I think it could have been done. Rapid killing. 15-inch 50 would be 25 to 30 foot longer than the 25 to 30 inches. Oh. Okay, so you've got 6,300 for 63.5 centimeters, 635 millimeters, or 762 millimeters, longer than 16-inch 45s actually used. 30 inches a barrel. Yeah, that's what I meant. Overall length difference depending on breech mechanism, length, and gun balance point, which might have been enough to compact the turret layout and save weight overall, even with the larger caliber. As far as the F3 design, I might reduce the conning tower 7 inches instead of 9 inch, or remove its protection against direct hits altogether if possible, for splinter shrapnel aircraft machine gun postings to save a bit of weight to be used elsewhere. I would also certainly flip the engines and boilers, as it is a good design move all round, though I'm a bit concerned about the length of the shaft needed, and would look into turbo-electric drive like the standard type ships, which we know can handle the speed requirement as Lexington's used the system. You know it can handle because we know the Americans can. The British have some idea they can, but the British also don't have those systems themselves. The British do not want to try and import from America these systems. They don't trust the Americans that much for their spare supplies, spare parts, so it's a case of it's what the British have available that they can use. This might even allow 4 shafts with 2 engine units whilst increasing subdivision and electricity available. I would probably look into designing a 4.7 inch 50 as a dual-purpose weapon in a twin turret for a secondary to replace the 4.7 inch and 6 inch armament actually mounted on Nelson Rodney, and likely on the F3's final design. Okay, I went 5.5 but 4.7 inch, I can see why you're going there. By doing this, I am saving on complexity and internal space. 8 to 10 such installations should be possible. It might even save weight when all things are taken into account, become the prototype of a lighter installation for cruisers and destroyers later on. I doubt anyone's going to fit a 4 point... well, maybe it's a secondary onto a cruiser. On destroyers, a twin-purpose turret? Potentially, but it's going to be a complete redesign, which is one of the reasons why the 4.5 enters service for the capital ships much earlier than it does for the destroyers. By doing this, I'll answer that one. While the 24.5-inch torpedo is cool from a technical standpoint, they're a bit pointless on a capital ship. Take up a lot of useful space and open up a weakness in the anti-torpedo defences, thus they can go. Any remaining displacement is to be placed into beefing and beefing up the armour. These ships should provide a significant boost in power for Royal Navy overall, and with renown and repulse, cruising speeds, cruising stroll spots, and counties in slightly less concerning areas should provide a big gun deterrent that they are looking for. The effect of the 15-inch 50, retrofitted if possible, unworkable shell hoist adjustments might be needed, would be major, as that would allow the Queen Elizabeth's renowned hood, and they can engage the Littorios at their good ammunition day ranges. It would also mean the King George V's are probably 9 15-inch 50 ships, giving the RN a single supply chain for heavy caliber naval guns, and thus easing logistics greatly. Leftover 15-inch 42 guns and turrets can be used to strengthen the coastal fortifications around the Empire. Gibraltar, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malta, Dover and Suez could all benefit from them. Overall, it's a significant operational benefit for Royal Navy to go for the 15-inch 50 gun. It would be a major upgrade, which is something which I'm not sure if the treaties are supposed to allow. But there again, if the British are already built fielding ships with it, you can make the case, and it is a 15-inch gun, not a 16-inch gun. So you can say, look, we're not changing the gun size or the shell size, we're just increasing the caliber. I don't see too much changing the Japanese response. The Yamato class was always designed to US as the primary opponent, and the arguments for and against it are the same anyway. The Americans will probably be less troubled by these ships as done the actual Nelson class. They're smaller guns than the Colorado class all, and will probably not support the 14-inch in the Second London Treaty because of it. This frees up their concurrent design program for one set of headaches, and the improvements in that no longer compromise design cascade into later designs. That would be a net benefit for the US in the long run, while not being threatening to them in the short run. Germany isn't really in a position to respond to them, and probably still builds in a very similar fashion to the actual ships. Dictators tend to like bloated weapon systems, after all. I can't really disagree with that one, they do. The Italians and the French are probably the most likely to be affected. The Italians will have to contend with 15-inch 50s, improved capabilities when considering their new 15-inch battleships. Result designs resulting in some not insignificant modifications, though they would be roughly similar in overall specification from a speed, firepower perspective, albeit with a bit more armour and slower build times. The French, if they can swallow their national pride for any practical thing, may well buy a design for the 15-inch 50 from the UK for the newest ships in the 1930s, resulting in both powers using the same shells and compatible guns in later years and easing logistics once again. Yeah, that ain't going to happen, but it's a nice idea to have. But for you go, 13.5-inch armour isn't really enough to deal with 16-inch shells. I'm an A-head and don't really like a rate slow to don't really rate slow to arm enough, though. Put differently, the F3s are still battlecruisers on the battle end of the spectrum. However, a 27-knot genuine battleship would still be tremendously useful for Empire duty, and the power plant savings from the F3 design would be enough to put the belt up to 14.5 inches with a cheerfully thick deck. With 15-inch 50 or even 16-inch 45 caliber, the ship would be a world beater. I don't know. I still might keep the old 15-inch 42 in a triple if it means other onboard amenities. That was a very good gun. The lessons from the 12-inch 50 are valuable ones. Bigger is not always better. True, but 1550 does. There are so many advantages. Sorry, it's just the logistician part of me, the part of me that looks at logistics and these things are just going. BT got something right. I know even a broken clock, a clock is right twice a day, but he got something right. Do up. Some other historian brought up Standing Goodall this week. Must be something there. Did you do so privately? I'm not sure, but there's yes. I think you're talking about me. Yes, I've been chatting with lots of people about Standing Goodall recently, privately and publicly. But privately, I've been chatting with a lot of people about him, mainly because I'm sort of leaning towards him being one of the people I write a book about. Because I'm putting together. My plan is to do 4 45,000 word books for Kindle as my enter into Kindle books and to see how they do. J-class and U-class flag submarines and flag-class corvettes are going to be 2 of them. I think I'm going to do Goodall because I know the most about him and to do him in 45,000 words. I think I can do justice and give people basically an introduction to him. Because I'm going to do all the Third Sea Lords and all the Directors of Naval Construction. And I'm kind of umming. I think I might even go Jellicoe for my Admiral. As my sort of first 4 books. And then just see how it does. But so I've been talking to a few people about him. That's right. Honestly, if you ask me, they should have developed the 1550 caliber gun anyway to help keep the gun foundries going. Yeah, but you need an improvement to get it. I have a feeling the F3 battlecruiser design might have been created in British 1920s complete modernisation was always meant for the older 30.5-inch armed battlecruisers once the Treasury got spooked on how expensive G3s were. I doubt it. I agree with Force A1 on this. Britain built Nelsons and Hood, and the G3s would not have been that much more expensive than either. Not to mention, this would be a world of Amagis, Keys, and Lexingtons. Something like the F3 wouldn't stand against them. And what stops the design being modified to take 16-inch guns? Force A1. At that point, it's basically G3 with a slightly different layout, and will cost as much. Not that a design like the F3 is going to ever be drawn up in the first place in the world without the Washington Treaty. Bingo, because at what point does someone willing decide to build a 35,000-ton ship when you can build 40,000, 45,000-ton ships? Alex Magnus. Every time you do that obnoxious singing at the beginning of your videos, I have to force myself to not immediately go swatch something else. Well, I would say it's atrocious, not obnoxious. Atrocious is what I'd be going for. It's bad singing, but I have explained it in a couple of videos exactly why I do the singing. It's to do the sound check, etc. at the beginning. And because I haven't got starter music. I'm only able to do that because I know you have interesting things to say on this topic. That being said, if I have to force myself to not click off this video because I know what's coming, that means you're probably losing out on thousands or perhaps even tens of thousands of new subscribers who don't know value what comes after cringe and don't want sticking around after the first 5 seconds. Don't be obnoxious. You're shooting yourself in the foot. Interesting enough, I went and checked my analytics. First of all, I had to find the analytics because I don't really check them often. Probably, considering how seriously I am taking this to try and stop having this bet hanging over my head of the 10,000 subscribers between my mother and my aunt. They're twins. It's been explained in several videos. I'm not going into it again. I should have checked them before, but I haven't. And I checked. And do you know what's the scary thing, Alex? And this is one Alex to another speaking. This is scaring me. Actually, the videos where I've sung at the beginning, I hold on to more people for the first 5 minutes than the videos where I don't. So, and I'm openly saying my singing's atrocious. I object to being called obnoxious, but I say it's atrocious. And it's holding on to more people. So, can you explain it to me? Because I can't. It's just scary. Okay. Ian Carr. If Nelson was faster than the cheese may have survived without with the torpedo striking further aft. Could have protected torpedo. Yeah, could have protected the cheese, yes. Torpedo cheese. Leslie Mitchell. Dr. Clarke. Rating. Singing. 1 out of 10. Fair. Probably a little high. History. 10 out of 10. Teaching. 10 out of 10. Keep up history. Do not become a cabaret singer. I find this video has confirmed the Nelson Romney were a missed opportunity. They were. About tinkering the F2 design. Obviously change the engine and boiler rooms. See heat problem. Make a bigger superstructure. Have a single dual 6-inch secondaries. Having single and dual 6-inch secondaries is weird. 2-pounders for flak is inadequate even for 1921, given that you need some heavy flak for anti-ship work, anti-airship work, just in case, and potential for even more after refit. Thus, future-proofing the design, we know that the Air Force will be serious. Land-based bombers are already proven to be effective, shown by Italian bombing ratings on the Kataro base of Austro-Hungary. Interesting. I also like the J3 hood design. It needs a shorter belt, and it also like it looks like it would be less moist. Looks like it would be less moist inside. Less moist inside? I'm thinking this was a voice-to-text comment. Very fancy software. Not sure what you're trying to say. Also, like the way it shows up in World of Warships as Rook. Bishop, it's too bad for those opposing enemy rabbits that they not have a copy of Jane's Big Book of Rabbits. Watership Down would have been made far worse with such a book. It really would have. Fight for a global First Amendment. Dr. Clarke, is it possible the French may have accepted the entire High Seas Fleet being transferred to the Royal Navy in exchange for all land-based weapons and technologies being given to them, the French? Probably not, but also there's a lot more powers involved than the French. There's also the Italians and the Americans, and they're all very picky. Trust me, in 1921, the 20s, in 1918, they're all picky. 1919, 1920, 21, they're all very, very picky. Michael Gooch, thanks for another enjoyable, informative session. Pleasure. Some time ago, you asked us about whether we preferred this sort of video as a recording of the Long Patrol live chat. I think this video and the live chat perfectly demonstrates the way the two formats offer different things. I watch live chats for enjoyment, the interaction, both yours and viewers, and between the chatters themselves. Whole sub-threads of conversation bubble away without your involvement. Yes, I only get involved in the ones which I think I need to get involved in. However, your interaction with the chat, answering questions, going off on tangents, while interesting, gets in the way of you conveying the information on topic at hand. Long patrols, however, while lacking the atmosphere of the live, see you concentrate on the topic, and I personally find it easy to follow the topic and the points you're raising without the interruptions of the chat. Neither format is better, both hit the target, but both in my mind are aiming at different targets. If I want a knowledgeable session, I go for a recording. If I want to have fun with some knowledge, I go for a live. Thank you. My coach, your question about the impact of if the RN built the F3s. Well, you said that one of the German design criteria was we need to be faster than NORADs, otherwise they'll chew us up. Well, with the F3s, to an official top speed of 29 knots, suddenly that gets a whole lot more difficult. To still meet the criteria, the Kriegsmarine needs faster ships, and speed means more engine power, which requires compromise elsewhere. So what would the Germans sacrifice to get faster Bismarck class, faster Scharnhorst and Gneisenau class? Firepower, protection, because they can't get more speed unless they lose something. Yeah. Juicy Decision, you have changed your image since we last chatted, I think. Seriously, the image is different. It's a big firework display, I think. Love Nelson's, but I always have an affection for an oddball. If we were going to really do a full-fat 35,000-ton F3, then with my hindsight hat on, I'd like to ditch the secondaries and torpedoes for a bunch of high-angle 4-inch twin mounts. These are the early 1920s after all, and take all the weight-saving displacement room to put on battleship-style framing in the subdivision. Flipping the engines and boilers also sounds like a great idea, and we can ditch the armour on the conning tower for further weight savings to be used elsewhere. And re-gunning the rest of the fleet with the same 15-inch 50s is exactly the choice the British should have done. You could turn around and offer to remove 15-inch 42s to the French for Dunkirk for free, which gives them a big boost, and default combined logistics situation at very, very low cost. Given the time frame of the Yamatos, were the Japanese designing against the Nelsons, or did they ignore the threat these two ships actually possessed? They didn't ignore them completely, but they felt with their speed they could dictate when they'd have to fight them. That's the point. They felt with the speed advantage they could dictate when they'd have to fight them. Stephen Davies, given the technology of these ships and the fact they are neutered from what they could have been, why did Vanguard's design go back to such an old school design? Well, here's my response, and this is where I'm going to get into trouble. And I can imagine this is going to generate a number of comments from you all, so let me explain it all. Speed, ease of construction were key driving factors, basically considering Vanguard design, the R to the Alliance Queen Elizabeths. It's true. Basically, the Vanguard is a design which the British are doing to try and build battleships quickly so they can maintain numbers at a key point while dealing with the delays in their new super ships. So basically, the idea was, we'll build the Vanguards to give us the number of ships. Andhelm, thank you for covering the design of these two famous warships. I really like the design and have for years read nothing of flattering about them. The trouble is, they have to be looked at in a very specific perspective, because there is another reason for making them as slow as they are. Because if you make them faster, you don't have a problem. The RN then has the Rs as their slow battleships. The Queens and probably the Nelrods as their fast battleships. And then they have their battle cruisers. That means the Rs are confirmed as being not even really second class or second class citizens, because you've got your battle cruisers, your fast wing. You then have your Nelrods and Queen Elizabeths, which are probably going to be you modified a Queen Elizabeth as well. So you put in there, instead of dropping boiler space and wait to add on more armor, you might actually use the space to add in more boilers to get up the speed when you do the boiler refits and get them up to 28 knots as well. You end up with a fast battle line of 28 knots, maybe all armed with 15-inch 50s, some with 8, some with 9. And these ships are suddenly really fast. And that's your fast battle line. Battle cruisers, also on 15-inch 50s, are your world scourers. And then what are your Rs? Well, you might upgrade them to 15-inch 50s, you might leave them 15-inch 42s. Because honestly, at that point, they are never going to be fast enough to keep up your main battle line. They are going to be a constant drag on it. What becomes their purpose? You have pretty much erased the reason for existence of 5 of your ships. Now, this might mean you start a replacement program as soon as you can to replace them, and actually put more effort into it. And if you don't have the Nelrods at the speed the Nelrods officially go at, the Rs start to look really like a backwater. And the Royal Navy starts to look like a navy with... how do I put this politely? Only 10 capital ships. 15 on paper, but everyone knows on paper that 5 of those don't count. It's a strategic issue. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I do like these. I think, and this is the point, sort of the question I'm going to end this with, it's going to be about 15-inch 50s. If Britain does go the 15-inch 50 route, and does end up adapting all those ships to 15-inch 50, I'd like to hear what you think would happen. What do you think the butterfly effect of that would be? Do you think Littorio's, the Italians try for something bigger than the 15-inch 50? Do they go for a 16-inch? Or do they keep the 15-inch 50 and keep doing what they're developing? What do you think the French do? What do you think the Germans do? Come on, if you've got all these ships which are faster and 15-inch 50s, that's going to have an impact on the Second World War.
It's going to have an impact on what all these ships are doing. It's going to have an impact on everyone in terms of their development work. If Nelson and Rodney enter service, let's say they're 28.5 knot, or official speed, and actually they work about 35,000 tons. They get them in. They have they go for 28 knots, let's say, or yeah, let's 27 or 28 knots. Let's say for 28 knots. They manage to go 28 knots, 15-inch 50s. And they displace in. Britain turns around and goes, right, sorry everyone, they're 35,100 tons. Sorry. They're 100 tons over. And looks at the Americans and goes, With the Americans going, lexicons are, they are honestly 36,000 tons. Yeah, right. Or alternatively, they turn them in at 5,000 tons, at 34,000 tons, and theoretically 30 knots. But they have these gaps for 5 inches of armour plate on both sides that they can add to their belt. So each their armour plate is made up of a 10-inch belt with a 5 inches added, another 5-inch belt added on top. A la counties. You can decide which way you go, but I'd like to hear what you think the effect would be. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Thank you, Sarah, for your support and your comments. I do apologise that I don't always get things right when it comes to the presentation and doing things that you might like me to do the way you'd like to. It's funny the thing to say that after a couple of years I'm still learning this, but I am still learning this. I don't think you ever stop learning it. Because every time you get comfortable, it changes, because you have more people watching, and then you have to watch this and that and the other thing, and you have to deal with it, and the computer system keeps changing. XSplit keeps changing its systems. It's fun times. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. Hope you enjoyed.